Hey, it's me again. By the way, if you haven't subscribed, make sure you do. It's a fun time here and we're doing a lot of cool stuff. So hit that button and let's get into it. Now that we've talked about how using ChatGPT can make you a terrible programmer, let's look at a few ways you can use it to supercharge your programming, especially when it comes to learning how to code. Okay, rule number one. This is actually not quite a rule, it's more of a precaution, and that is learn about AI hallucination. Do you guys remember when you were kids and you turned, I don't know, for me it was like 14 maybe, and you realized that your parents didn't know everything and they weren't super geniuses? This is kind of the same thing. AI hallucination is probably the biggest precaution that I would give you, especially when you're learning to code. It can be very easy to just depend on the answers that a GPT gives you, but this provides some risks because large language models like ChatGPT can be mistaken, and even more dangerously, they can be confidently mistaken. Kind of like your parents. They can be wrong about something legitimately and be stubborn about changing their mind about it. AI does the exact same thing. So there's some risk to using these tools because oftentimes if they're wrong, they won't change their mind, so to speak, given new information. So hallucination is a big problem within AI, and it's something that might not get fleshed out very soon. So keep in mind that the word of AI is not the word of God, not yet at least. So you have to approach it with some caution. Rule number two is to use it for hints, not answers. So there's a lot of ways to use these GPTs, and I think that a lot of people think about using them in just a way that gives you the answers straight up when you have a bug or you're trying to learn something. When learning to code, it's really important to be guided, not led. You have to learn what material to consume and then practice. So use these models for suggestions, not straight up answers. Instead of simply copying and pasting your code and asking it to fix it for you, you might try to ask something like, I'm looking for help with a specific coding problem, but I want to learn. If I upload my code here, can you give me some hints as to what I might further investigate in my JavaScript? This is something that I've been doing, and it's been pretty helpful when I come across an issue because it doesn't just retype out the code for you in a fixed manner, sometimes fixed. It actually gives you hints and tells you maybe what you might look at or roughly what to start thinking about in order to properly debug the code. Another thing that I've been doing with this tool is asking it for simple coding problems. Look, I hate to admit it, but I'm not quite at the point where I'm grinding out leet code problems, even the more beginner ones. I've done a couple of them and they've been great, but sometimes they're just too hard or I don't understand them. And so I have to the only thing I can do is look at the solution right away or read as much as I can. So anyways, to get a little bit of an easier introduction into algorithm issues, you can ask ChatGPT something like, can you provide me with some beginner JavaScript coding challenges? And it will produce something that is of sufficient difficulty for you, and you can dial it up by asking it to make them harder or dial it down by asking them to make it easier. This is a great way to start getting regular practice with JavaScript or whatever coding language you happen to be learning. Manipulate this however you need to. Sometimes it'll just ask you general questions instead of giving you problems, so you'll have to be specific when you give them these prompts. Another thing that you could do with these coding challenges is write out some pseudocode, just like comments in your IDE, and ask it what it thinks about your pseudocode given the question that it asked you. It'll give you feedback without, again, you might have to tell it not to give you a straight up answer, but it will give you feedback on the pseudocode that you write and tell you whether or not you're headed in the right direction, kind of similar to how an interviewer would do it. By the way, I kind of thought of this earlier. This might be a good idea for some of these interview platforms to implement. There's a lot of interviewing platforms where you can get a coding interview with somebody who works at a FANG company or wherever, and you can do mock interviews with people. They charge a lot. Sometimes it's at least $150, if not several $100s for a mock interview on these websites. But what if they integrated an LLM like this and then used these, used a voice model to speak back to you and give you active feedback on your pseudocode and your approach, and you could ask it questions? That would be a pretty interesting business model. Just a thought. Take it if you want it. You can work on it. Just give me 20% royalties, please. Rule number 3 is ask it for advice. If you're asking it to give you coding challenges, it's going to learn a little bit about your approach to solving problems, as long as you're communicating it, and how you get to a specific resolution for complex issues. Use this to your advantage. It can give you feedback on your approach, provide guidance for what topics you should look into more, given your strong points or your weak points, so you know what to showcase to employers if given that chance, and you know what to work on for when you interact with those employers. You can also ask it for advice on things like resume reviews, cold emailing, or scripting LinkedIn requests, things like that. There's a lot that you can do on this front, so keep your imagination active. Rule number 4 is to automate the boring stuff. This is sort of the opposite of that point I made in the last video, but not quite. In the last video, I mentioned the dangers of depending on these models before you understand the fundamentals, basically having to do all the heavy lifting for you before you've put the work in. But once you've put the work in and you understand a lot about the fundamentals of developing, and you're able to produce reusable functions relatively quickly and bug-free, etc. If you're going to be creating the same function for the 50th time this week, maybe it's time to automate that. If you can come up with a prompt that will reliably produce that same function for you and save 2 or 3 minutes of your time, I would say go for it. You're going to know enough about that function to debug it if these language models get it wrong. And more importantly, you're going to be able to explain it to somebody who asks you about it. You're going to actually know what the hell you're having to do instead of having to produce code that you can't even read yourself, let alone explain to an employer or a coworker when it comes to test, debug, run, push to production, etc. You're not going to learn anything from building a small, hyper-specific component. I would say the benefit of automating it is far greater than spending the extra time doing it. If it's going to save you 3-4 minutes and get you to the end goal of working on the hard problems quicker, that's where you're going to learn. I think it's time better spent working on the harder stuff when you know how to punch out these functions like they're on the back of your hand. Okay, that's it. That's what I have right now concerning ChatGPT. I'm going to be looking more into these technologies in the future. Make sure you subscribe for more. I'm becoming a developer in 2023, and if you are doing that too, I would love to have you around for the ride. So that is it. Peace.